Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews, with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about Shiny Shoe's deck-building roguelike, Monster Train. But did I find this game to be a runaway success, or did it derail in no time flat? Since time immemorial, a war has raged between heaven and hell. Yet it seemed like there might finally come a lasting peace when heaven extended its hand with an offer of unity and grace for all. A pact which would not only serve to unite the various factions of hell, but serve to bind them in alliance with the divine planes. Both sides called this pact the Covenant. At least until the Seraph struck at hell's fiery heart, sundering the pyre and dooming the infernal planes to a frigid end. An end which is only hastened by the zeal in which Heaven's armies move in to lay low the survivors. Hell's only remaining hope rests with the Bone Shaker, a monstrous train driven by Hell's remaining champions as they make a desperate exodus to reignite their once blistering home with the dwindling remnants of their dying pyre. So, whilst the crux of this is presented in the game's introduction, I found myself pleasantly surprised by the additional bits of world building that are baked into the game. Some are obvious, like bits of boss dialogue that provide them more character, or the cave events and the small bits of dialogue they might contain. That said, I discovered that the crux of Monster Train's backstory was in an altogether inconspicuous spot. Specifically, it was cached within the Codex. As I pored over the flavor text for the cards and the relics I'd accumulated over the course of my various playthroughs, I found myself discovering that the conflict between heaven and hell had been fleshed out far more than I'd initially thought. What's more, I found myself charmed by the personality they further lent to each of the game's player factions and heroes. Hats off to Flicker for being a complete charlatan. Really, it was enough that I found myself duly motivated to scoop up new cards whenever they cropped up, even if it wasn't always a tactically viable decision. Still, a good chunk of what sets Monster Train apart from many of its deck-building peers is the simple fact that it introduces another style of gameplay into its guts, namely tower defense. Each time Heaven decides it's time to fight, you'll need to manage an actual battlefield, requiring you to strategically place units across each of the Bone Shaker's 3 floors in an effort to annihilate the array of angelic aggressors assaulting the train. What's more, you have a finite number of space on each floor to place your units who, by the by, are typically finite in nature and must survive the enemy's opening salvo before they can even retaliate. Factors which make optimal placement, spell usage, and long-term battle strategy extremely important, given that at the end of every turn, an enemy that survives your squadrons are going to ascend further up the train, ultimately drawing closer to the precious pyre fragment you're protecting. To be fair, all hope isn't lost should they reach it, given that it can defend itself, but since it retains damage from battle to battle, it behooves you to ward away would-be interlopers, especially in the case of the bosses that herald the end of each stage. Unlike their more pedestrian peers, these beefed-up baddies aren't content to move up floors until they've thoroughly liquefied anything and everything on a given floor. Something which truly tests out the formations you've set up across your train. And given the bosses are randomized, it tends to make planning around the majority of them difficult. The Seraph actually serves as a notable exception to this, as the game is more than eager to tip its hand towards the misfortune it has waiting in the wings for you. Whilst it may be a bit anxiety-inducing, I found it pivotal for formulating successful Seraph stabbing strategies and informing the decisions I made along the way. Well, mostly. You do have to pick which demon clans you'll be representing before you dive into a run and find out what dread fate awaits you. Clans plural, since you choose 2 to take along with you for the ride. Admittedly, your options are initially limited to the Hellhorned and Awoken factions, but as you fulfill certain requirements, you'll unlock the Stygian Guard, the Umbra, and the Melting Remnant, all of whom it can be mixed and matched with each other. It actually felt intensely rewarding, not only because of the decks and relics that these factions bring to the table will have very distinct flavors, but they open a lot of different synergies and play styles, especially when you factor in that the clan you choose to be your primary provides you a champion with their own triumvirate tricks to choose from. And there's actually going to be a secondary champion for each of these clans that you can swap between coming up in the new update that should be out by the time this review arrives. That said, this is also where the first of my gripes begins. See, at the start of your journey, and then again after the 2 main bosses of the game, you'll be given the option to choose an upgrade path for your champion. Unfortunately, the options you're granted for these upgrade paths is a random choice of 2 of their 3 prospective abilities, which may have led to me abandoning a few runs, since certain clans find their champions hard countered by some of the Seros' potential abilities. Cough. Awoken. Cough. Thankfully, if your goal is to devote yourself to one upgrade path, you'll never have to concern yourself with chance once you've made your initial choice, as it's always available to dive into. But the other option will always be random, which can make your initial choice painful if you picked it in the hopes of finding your ideal loadout later, or happen to be trying to mix and match hero upgrades, especially in the instance that your initial choice lacks the support it needs from the deck of relics, given there's a few upgrade paths that are double-edged swords and can contribute to an early demise. All the same, the game does provide the player with ample opportunities to try and better themselves, and it's fairly strategic to boot. See, as you're riding the rails between rumbles, you'll be given the choice between 2 different paths to follow, each with their own distinct encounters. These can range from scattered treasures, healing fonts for your pyre, to shops with an assortment of upgrades, or even portals to destroy or duplicate cards. That said, the part that I found the most unpredictable was the ice caves. This area is fairly notable given that it introduces players to events, but these can end up being vary greatly, whether it's benignly beneficial, an opportunity to find something out of the norm, or potentially potent boons with an equally dangerous downside. Trying to figure out the optimal course to take based on what they have to offer and what you need can definitely end up feeling a bit fraught, especially if you're trying to find out whether you should be favoring things based on short-term strategy, long-term goals, or just chasing the possibility of finding something that'll bring your set together. On the bright side, however, the game's at least kind enough to let you know that you haven't visited all of the options it does present along a track, so it makes it very hard to miss any of these options. What's more, so long as you get a handle on these elements, I didn't actually find the game to be overly brutal. At first. See, once you've managed to clear the game at least once, you're given the option to enter the Covenant, a series of 25 cumulative challenges to overcome and conquer. Honestly, as far as difficulty goes, it's a bit deceptive given that some of them don't seem to be too problematic at first. In fact, the introductory difficulty modifier of adding random cards from your clan to your deck provides some interesting variety to your hand and can sometimes help to inform what kind of champion path you'd want to take or overarching strategy to pursue. But as you get deeper into the Covenant, things become decidedly less friendly. Whether it's due to your deck becoming glutted with junk cards, your opposition becoming beefier, or just altogether deadlier. I'll admit, however, that nothing changed the way I played the game quite so much as the modifier which caused units spawned on the top floor to come in stunned, or the way it had a random floor have its capacity dropped by 1. Those are both incredibly harsh in themselves and can make proper management a bit of a hassle. But hey, if you do need to wind down, you can actually always poke at the daily runs, since they provide you a way to compete against your friends and strangers in score/time attacks. Plus, they have some fairly interesting modifiers you can enable, allowing you to tailor runs to either be more difficult or just outright sillier than you normally engage in, which is pretty fun. That said, if you're the sort that doesn't want to ease off the throttle, things can go in the other direction as well, considering that a number of expert challenges were implemented for folks who have reached Covenant 25. With 15 of them in all, they present some distinct combination of mutators which change up the Covenant 25 experience, and add some rather distinct challenges to an experience that's already fairly rough, and there's actually going to be 5 more of these being added with the new update. I'm actually pretty excited for that, I'm not gonna lie. But that's a whole lot of words for mechanics, so let's move on to aesthetics. Stylistically, I actually found myself thinking fondly of a number of elements. For one thing, the cards themselves are lovely to look at and have some quality animations for their portraits. I was also rather fond of the fact that you could upgrade the borders to your cards by taking them through a successful Covenant run. Something which you could then further customize around by unlocking the optional border types in your logbook by fulfilling different conditions, such as completing a number of the daily runs or doing all of the challenges in the game, etc. What's more, that level of quality is also extended to the character and enemies to boot, though I did find myself seeing a number of similarities within the design of certain creatures. Still, it's always pleasing to the eye, and it's accompanied by a genuinely solid soundtrack. And hey, if you do manage to get to the end of Covenant 25, there's a really lovely vocal track you get to listen to that helps to make all of that soul-draining frustration ebb away into the ether. Honestly, the only grievance I can think of on a sound design level is that it can sometimes be a bit hellish if you're playing it on max speed and dealing with the multi-striking units. Which, oh right, by the way, if you just hate turns taking forever, you can speed up the game. It's lovely, other than the sound thing. But anyways, alright, we've reached the finale. And I gotta say, I did not expect to be drawn into this game anywhere near as heavily as it ended up being. I can't count the number of times I took a pause from writing this review to give the game a short poke, only to realize it somehow became 5:48 in the morning. Like, I am really quite fond of the game, and that's saying a lot given it also managed to infuriate me in almost equal measure as I continued to chug away at the Covenant challenges. It's a genuinely well thought out and clever card game, enough so that even at 206 hours in, and Covenant clears for all of the factions, and all the challenges done, I can't even imagine I'm fully done with it, especially given the new update that's coming out. And considering that I've already nudged some friends to go and give it a look and found myself practically consumed by it, I definitely say I'd be remiss if I rated it as anything less than a crit hit. Any which way, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or our one day totally not dead Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. There's also a Discord, and click the link in the banner or description so you can become part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor, and make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description in the banner for them links. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.